Britain in the 1940s was a nation on its knees. The war had ended, but the scars ran deep: bombed streets, fuel rationing, and a country desperately trying to rebuild. Into this battered world, British car manufacturers returned with bold promises and new designs. Some of those cars became icons. Others became disasters, vehicles that rusted prematurely, overheated without warning, and left their owners stranded on rain-soaked roads. Today on Britain Rewind, we are counting down the 10 worst British cars of the 1940s. If you love forgotten British history, subscribe and stay with us because number 1 was truly unbearable. Now let's start with number 10. Number 10, Hillman Minx Phase 2. The Hillman Minx had been a familiar name on British roads since the 1930s, and when Rootes Group revived it after the war, many buyers were hopeful. The Phase 2 arrived in 1947, powered by a modest 1,185cc four-cylinder engine producing just 35 horsepower, figures that were already beginning to feel outdated in a rapidly changing world. The styling was uninspired, carrying a pre-war silhouette with minor cosmetic updates rather than a genuine fresh start. But the real problems went much deeper than its appearance. The 3-speed gearbox was notoriously clunky, making smooth gear changes an exercise in frustration. The suspension offered little comfort on Britain's war-damaged roads, turning every journey into an ordeal. Owners complained about persistent water leaks, unreliable electrics, and bodywork that began rusting surprisingly quickly. For a car sold to optimistic post-war buyers at a significant cost, the disappointment was palpable. Would you have trusted your savings to this machine? Next up is the car which is something even more forgettable. Number 9, Wolseley 8. Few names carried more prestige in pre-war Britain than Wolseley. The brand had cultivated an image of quality and refinement, and buyers returning to the showrooms in 1945 expected something worthy of that heritage. What they found was the Wolseley 8, a vehicle that, despite its distinguished badge, was powered by an anemic 918cc side-valve engine producing a barely believable 26 horsepower. This was not progress. This was not even standing still. It was a retreat. The body was narrow, cramped inside, and built with a kind of economy that made post-war austerity feel genuinely miserable. The 4-speed gearbox was one of the few redeeming features, but even that could not mask the car's profound lack of performance. On open roads, drivers discovered the hard truth: this car struggled to hold pace with other traffic. Electrical faults surfaced early. The ride was harsh. Wolseley's reputation quietly suffered. And very few people today even remember this car existed. Number 8 awaits. Number 8, Standard 8. Standard Motor Company had a loyal following before the war, and the 8 was their entry-level offering, a car positioned for the working-class British family trying to get back on its feet. Launched in 1945, the Standard 8 used a small 803cc four-cylinder engine that could barely summon 26 horsepower on a good day. Top speed sat somewhere around 60 miles per hour, but reaching it felt like asking the car to do something it fundamentally resisted. The interior was Spartan in the extreme: no heating, minimal instrumentation, and seats that offered the kind of comfort more associated with wooden park benches. Standard had stripped every conceivable luxury to keep costs down. But the real issue was durability. The bodywork was thin, prone to rust within a few short years, and the engine had a worrying tendency to overheat in summer traffic. Buyers had hoped for better. What they received was barely adequate. Number 7 brings us something equally grim. Number 7, Austin 16. Austin was one of Britain's most trusted names, and the Austin 16 should have been a flagship worth celebrating. Reintroduced in 1945 after wartime suspension, it came equipped with a 2,199cc 6-cylinder engine producing around 60 horsepower, figures that sounded promising on paper. But the Austin 16 was built almost entirely from pre-war tooling, and that heritage was far from a blessing. The body was enormous and heavy, demanding constant effort from an engine that had not been significantly updated in nearly a decade. Fuel consumption was punishing, a serious concern in an era of strict rationing, where every drop of petrol felt like liquid gold. The gearbox was slow and imprecise, the steering vague, and the brakes provided little confidence at any meaningful speed. Despite its generous dimensions, the interior felt surprisingly ordinary. Owners began to question whether Austin had genuinely tried. Most examples have been forgotten. Can you imagine paying for this? And the car at number 6 is almost as dismal. Number 6. Jowett Bradford. Jowett of Bradford was a small manufacturer with an enthusiastic following, and the Bradford van-based car that arrived in 1946 carried a certain rugged charm. But charm only takes you so far. The Bradford was powered by a flat-twin 1005cc engine producing just 25 horsepower, an output that was, even by 1940s standards, meager. The top speed barely reached 50 miles per hour, and on any kind of incline, drivers quickly learned to plan ahead. The two-speed gearbox was a genuine frustration, limiting the car's usefulness dramatically. Inside, passengers sat in an environment that felt more agricultural than automotive. The seats were basic, headroom was tight, and the absence of any meaningful insulation meant that wind and cold found their way in freely. The Bradford was honest about its limitations, but those failings remained too significant to overlook. Yet somehow it survived into the 1950s. And what came next on our list was considerably more ambitious and considerably more embarrassing. Number 5. Singer SM1500. By 1948, Singer Motors of Coventry was attempting something genuinely fresh. The SM1500 arrived with a relatively modern 1497cc overhead camshaft engine producing around 48 horsepower, more sophisticated than most competitors of its era. The body wore a smooth, flowing shape that looked confident for its time, and early reviews were cautiously optimistic. But the real test was ownership. And there, the SM1500's reputation began to unravel rather spectacularly. The overhead camshaft engine, sophisticated in theory, proved enormously temperamental in practice. It required constant, careful maintenance, something most ordinary British families simply could not provide. Ignoring the engine's demands resulted in expensive, demoralizing failures. The gearbox linkage wore quickly, producing imprecise gear selection that made daily driving unnecessarily challenging. Water found its way through window seals, and the dashboard electrics proved persistently unreliable. Singer's ambitious engineering philosophy had exceeded their manufacturing capability. Owners felt genuinely let down. Only a handful of SM1500s survive today. The car at number 4 marks a truly significant step downward. Number 4. Vauxhall Wyvern E-Type. Vauxhall had been manufacturing cars under General Motors ownership since the 1920s, and by 1948, the Wyvern arrived as their fresh post-war offering. Powered by a 1442cc four-cylinder engine producing around 35 horsepower, its full-width body and integrated boot gave it a genuinely modern appearance. Early buyers were drawn in. But beneath that contemporary exterior, old problems were already taking hold. The column-mounted gear change was notoriously awkward, regularly defeating drivers who attempted smooth, rapid gear changes. The independent front suspension, while technically advanced, had been poorly calibrated, handling felt nervous and unreliable across Britain's war-damaged roads. And those roads, in 1948, were in genuinely dreadful condition. Rust appeared alarmingly early, spreading through door panels and sills within just a few years. The Wyvern was a car of real promise that consistently failed to deliver on it. Owners grew deeply frustrated. Very few original examples survive today. Number 3 involves a more respected British name, and an even more surprising failure. Number 3. Triumph 1800 Saloon. Triumph had cultivated an image of sporting elegance throughout the 1930s, and the 1800 Saloon, arriving in 1946, was meant to signal their confident return. The body was genuinely handsome, a flowing, razor-edge design with coach-built aspirations that gave it a far more distinguished appearance than most contemporaries. But beauty was essentially all this car offered. The 1776cc four-cylinder engine was an indirect injection unit producing just 63 horsepower, adequate at best, uninspiring at worst. The 4-speed gearbox required delicate handling to avoid expensive crunching. Worse still, the car's electrical system was a labyrinth of unreliability. Triumph had sourced components from multiple suppliers during post-war shortages, and the result was a wiring harness that seemed to develop new faults on a near-weekly basis. Headlights flickered, gauges misbehaved, and starting the engine on cold winter mornings was an act of faith rather than engineering. For a car positioned as refined, this was deeply embarrassing. Number 2 awaits, and it gets considerably worse. Number 2, Morris 8 Series E. The Morris 8 was one of the most beloved small cars in pre-war Britain. Families had trusted it in enormous numbers. So when Morris revived the Series E after the war in 1945, expectations were high. The disappointment that followed was all the more crushing for it. The Series E retained the aging 918cc side-valve engine producing just 29 horsepower, a design firmly rooted in the 1930s. Performance was desperately poor. Top speed barely exceeded 55 miles per hour, and the 3-speed gearbox offered little flexibility in traffic. The interior remained stubbornly basic, narrow seats, poor headroom, and heating that barely functioned in winter. Bodywork corrosion became a defining problem. Winter road salt attacked the thin steel panels with devastating speed and thoroughness. Morris's loyal customers felt abandoned by the company they had trusted. They had wanted progress. What they received was barely disguised repetition. But what comes next on our list made this car look genuinely accomplished by comparison. Number 1, Bond Mini Car Mark A. Nothing could have prepared Britain for the Bond Mini Car. Introduced by Bond Cars Limited of Preston in 1948, it represented perhaps the most audacious and disastrous attempt at economy motoring that the country has ever seen. The Mini Car was a 3-wheeled microcar of staggering simplicity. Its single-cylinder VS 2-stroke engine displaced just 122 cc, producing a barely credible 4.3 horsepower. For horsepower. In 1948. The car had no reverse gear, none. To change direction, drivers were required to physically lift the front of the vehicle and turn it. The single front wheel, which both steered and drove, made handling feel genuinely terrifying at any speed beyond a gentle crawl. There was no suspension worth mentioning. The flimsy aluminium body offered no meaningful crash protection, and the open cabin provided no shelter from British weather. Cold, wet, slow, frightening, and impossible to reverse, the Bond Mini Car was not a car. It was a rolling catastrophe. And somehow, many people still bought it. The 1940s were a brutal chapter in British motoring history. A nation emerging from war, starved of resources, attempted to rebuild its roads with vehicles that were frequently unworthy of the journey. Some manufacturers tried bravely and fell short. Others barely tried at all. These cars remind us that progress is never guaranteed, even in peacetime. If you enjoyed this journey through Britain's forgotten automotive disasters, let us know in the comments which car surprised you most. And if you are new here, subscribe to Britain Rewind for more stories like this every single day. Until next time.